Good day, my fellow hustlers. This is Elijah from the Side Hustler Society. And I hope you're ready for another episode. Because in this episode, we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people gloss over, which is time management and productivity. When we come from corporate America, there's a lot of in place structure that is put in place to make sure we're maximizing those two things. So if we go into business for ourselves, and leave corporate America, we may find ourselves not using any of that stuff because we don't have to. We're our own boss, which is commendable, which is respectable. But whether we like it or not, that corporate structure that was put in place for a reason plays a role in people getting certain outcomes. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily need to adopt the same or exact similar structure, but something still needs to be put in place to make sure you're not burning yourself out, overworking yourself, and making sure that you get your tasks done in I'll say, efficient manner. That's why I'm glad that for today's guest, we'll be bringing on Alexis Haselberger, who's a time management and productivity coach who helps people do more and stress less through coaching, workshops, and online courses. Her pragmatic yet fun approach helps people easily integrate practical, realistic strategies into their lives so that they can do more of what they want and less of what they don't. Alexis has taught thousands of individuals, 1,500,000 students and counting, to take control of their time, and her clients include Google, Lyft, Workday, Capital One, Upwork, and more. So let's go ahead and hop into this episode. I'm real excited, so let's get to it.
Welcome to the Side Hustler Society podcast with your host, Elijah Bilel. This is where you can find out more about hustles that are best for you, and of course, make more money in the process. Elijah has been in the gig economy and freelance space for over 5 years and has done over 3,000 deliveries on Uber Eats. He's an Airbnb superhost, runs multiple YouTube channels, and is the author of the best-selling book, The Anatomy of Financial Success. It's his mission to empower people with the tools needed to be successful. Now, welcome your host, the king of side hustles, Elijah Bilel.
Okay, we're live. Alexis, how's your day going so far?
It's going great. Happy to be talking to you.
Hey, we're happy to have you. Are you based in the United States by any chance?
I am. I'm in San Francisco.
Oh, did you see the eclipse yesterday, or did it not pass over California?
We didn't. Yeah, we didn't have like the path of totality over here. And honestly,
Oh.
I meant to look out the window when it was happening, and I just like got busy and didn't do it. So I feel a little bad about that.
Okay. For the audience, y'all are probably wondering, Elijah, what the heck you talking about? Yeah, so an eclipse happened yesterday as of the time of this recording, and the next one is supposed to happen like 2044. So obviously an eclipse is a pretty rare thing. It was pretty epic because I went outside. When it happened, I went off to the rooftop of my building, and it was a whole crowd. Everyone was gathering around, and it literally went from 1 o'clock in the day to seemingly 8 o'clock at night, and then it gradually went back to 1 o'clock in the day. But that had a jarring effect on me because when it almost hit nighttime, I started mentally shifting like, oh well, like I started thinking about like, well, what's happening on the next episode of Breaking Bad, or like all the nighttime stuff I do to decompress. Like, no, it's still in the middle of the day. Okay, you're taking a break to check this eclipse out, but you got to go, get back on the hustle after this is finished. I have to kind of slap myself out of it.
Yeah, that is so funny, right? It's like, imagine if we lived in one of those places where the day it gets dark at like 2 p.m. every day in the winter, right?
Or is it in Antarctica or Alaska or someplace in the world? It's like daylight for like 6 months, and then it's pure nighttime for 6 months.
Yeah, I think the farther either north or south you get, like the farther away from the equator, right? It's that it gets more extreme in those ways.
Oh gosh, that'd be too much of a shift. I couldn't do it, me personally.
That would be rough. Yeah.
Yeah. Me not seeing the sun that long, I'd probably be likely to get depressed.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I actually I had a year where I was living abroad and working we called it a vampire schedule. So we worked during, from midnight to 8 a.m. every day because our kids were still in school in San Francisco during the pandemic, during, Zoom school, and we were working, but we were living on the other side of the country. So I did that for a year, and I don't think I could have done it for a whole lot longer.
Vampire schedule. That's an
Yeah.
interesting take on I think most people call it the graveyard shift
Yeah.
or something like that. I like that better, the vampire schedule.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I didn't call it a shift because I was doing it to myself.
Right. Okay. But yeah, with that being said, we can go ahead and kind of hop into the topic of the show, because obviously when it comes to people leaving the 9 to 5, being self-employed or being freelancers, I mean, this is the Side Hustler Society. So we do cover side hustles, but every now and then we do tackle approaches from things from a full-time perspective, meaning that you're not a 9 to 5, you're responsible for your own schedule. And there's certain things that a job provides that if you don't put those similar structures in place, you may find that you're going to have some problems. So since you're a time management coach, I think you're a great person to talk to about the subject. When you say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to talk about this because I feel like, one, I have personal experience with moving from a corporate environment to working for myself. And then I also have lots of clients who are freelancers or who are starting businesses. Even if that's full time, just like you said, there's still something that, when you're having to provide that structure for yourself, it can be more difficult, and you can find yourself kind of not being as productive as you wanted to, even though you had the best of intentions.
Right. So some people might actually be wondering, because they may not have actually heard these terms said before, or phrases or professions, but what exactly is a time management and productivity coach?
Yeah, that is a really great question. So I help people who have big lives, big jobs, or both, people who are overwhelmed and have lots on their plates, lots they want to do, lots they want to accomplish. I help them to use their time in a way that is in accordance with their goals and their values, right? So I like to think of it like sometimes, right, it can feel like the day just happens to us, right? We show up, we get on our computer, we start answering a couple emails, and then all of a sudden it's 6 p.m. and we haven't crossed a single thing off our to-do list. But, it feels like we've been working all day, right? And so I help people who are just not feeling really in control of their time to gain skills so that every day they feel really good about how they used their time.
Okay. I think it's in one of Robert Kiyosaki's books, but he kind of warned about this trap about how you can get busy in busyness, but not end up getting anything accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you're the cure to that happening.
Yeah, I think so, right? Or I'm the I don't know, the catalyst to that happening for other people, right?
Okay. So how do you find yourself in this profession as far as being a time management and a productivity coach?
Yeah, so I spent the first 15 years or so of my career working in early stage startups here in the Bay Area. And what I found over that time is that people were working crazy hours, burning out left and right. People would be in the office, sometimes sleeping in the office. People would be in the office till all hours, not necessarily being productive that whole time, right? But there was just a lot of overwork. And I like to say I did everything except for sales and engineering. So I had roles that were operations, HR, legal, finance, like taking care of all of that stuff. And I knew that for me, I wanted to really be excellent at the work that I did. I always wanted to produce excellent work. I wanted to go above and beyond, but I was unwilling to do that by working longer and harder hours. That was not something I wanted. I always wanted to have a weekend. I always wanted to have evenings free to myself. I like to take vacations. I've never checked email on a vacation. And so I found that people started coming to me for that type of thing. And eventually one of the CEOs that I worked for was like, hey, do you think you could produce a workshop for our company just on the things you already do? And I thought that sounded like a lot of fun. And so that sparked something in me that was like, oh, this is a skill set that I have acquired over the years, but it's not a skill set that everyone has. Nobody teaches it in college. Nobody teaches it in high school. And so some people kind of sink or swim. And it wasn't that it was easy for me. It was just that that was very important to me to make that happen. And so actually I learned several years after I started my business around time management and productivity coaching that I also have ADHD, which kind of is like, oh yes, people usually have ADHD are not great at time management, but we do the work we need, right? So I gained those skills because I had areas where it came really difficult to me. So that's how I found myself here.
Quite the origin story. As you were describing it, I was kind of wondering like where to categorize it, because you have like the soft skills and the hard skills, but it really sounds like this is kind of like a hybrid between the two, maybe closer to the soft skill side, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're really right about it being more of a hybrid because, it's not like people use their time in a way that doesn't work for them because necessarily they don't know what to do, right? Lots of times we've read all the books, right? We've read, Getting Things Done and Deep Work and, all of this stuff, and it's still not coming that easily to us because there are other things involved in this. It's communication. It's communication with our coworkers, with our boss. It's boundary setting, in addition to learning skills like how to produce a task management system that works for you.
Talk about boundary setting. The moment you become self-employed, like everyone thinks you're just free to talk to. You
Yes.
set some boundaries pretty fast, and not in a disrespectful way, but I just let them know, basically what's up. You're definitely gonna have some problems. So that's something to be aware of.
I think that's really true. And I think that it's a trap that a lot of folks fall into, right? Because when we go out on our own and everything is resting on our shoulders, like whether we're not getting a paycheck unless we go out there and get the work, right? And so
Right.
it can feel like, well, I have to be at the beck and call of anyone who wants to talk to me, right? If I have this client, I have to over service them. And that can lead to burnout really quickly and a situation where you're talking about with some problems there, where then now we have to go and like renegotiate these boundaries. And so that's never fun. It's like if we were available 24/7 and now we're saying, hey, we're only going to be available between 9 and 6, that can feel bad. Whereas if we started out saying, as I do to my clients, like you can email me anytime you want. I will only answer during my business hours. So, don't worry, you can email me at 2 a.m. on the weekend. I don't have notifications turned on. I'll email you back on Monday.
Yeah. And actually I have kind of a personal story to tell, but yeah, not the moment, but I'll say years after I started my own business and became self-employed, you eventually become an expert at what you're doing. So people want to kind of pick your brain. And it started getting to where I was getting all these phone calls all the time from people. Some people I knew, some people I didn't know. And I was starting to feel myself getting burned out a little. So what I did was I actually just started a consultation business. Like, hey, going forward, this is how much it costs to book a session for my time for an hour. And I'm gonna be honest, all that dropped off by like 75%, which was the intended result. But 25% stuck around. Like, oh, Elijah, I don't have any problem paying you for your time. Yeah, I just want that information that's in your brain and your perspective on certain things. So just let me know what your rate is. So everyone ends up feeling better.
Yeah, that's so I think about this as like we want to stay above the resentment line, right? We we want to make sure that in our pricing, in our boundaries and all of these things, that we're on the right side of the resentment line. Because it even, I've had similar things happen to me earlier in my business where it was like, oof, I can't take all these pick your brain sessions. Like I actually have work I need to get done, but it feels kind of bad to say that to be like, I'm not willing to. And so I actually went, I do coaching and consulting. So people that want that, they come to me for that. But also I still do leave. I have like 2 slots a month, like 25-minute slots that I will leave open for, a warm intro from somebody who they're just getting started and they want, just to ask a few questions or something like that. But what I did is limit it to 2 times a month so that kept it above the resentment line for me.
Right. And I'm gonna go off topic a little and talk about something that you and me probably can both relate to, because we are both YouTubers.
Yeah.
So with that being the case, we have a vehicle to give a lot of free content out. If we really feel like we keep getting this reoccurring question, but maybe a person wouldn't necessarily be a good consulting client because of various reasons, we can still put that information out there for people to benefit from in the form of a YouTube video. But I think that gives us permission to be extra stingy with our time since we can't do that. Am I right?
I agree. I mean, I was just thinking as we were talking about like, how do we have we probably do our YouTube channels for all sorts of different reasons. But one of those that's really helpful is one, when we get asked these questions, that helps us know what kind of content to create, right? And then two, we can point people in the direction of free resources and feel good about that and doesn't feel like we're saying no.
Right. Plus, it's something that all the people in the future of that question can also benefit from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're creating an asset, right? So that you're not doing the kind of recreating the wheel over and over and over again, which is not very efficient for our time.
Right. So I'll go ahead and swing back on topic because my audience feel like, Elijah, is this a video about YouTube? No, not completely. So I would want to ask, when it comes to like the number one problem that you've seen among people who are self-employed or full-time freelancers, what is that number one problem when it comes to time management, and what can people do to solve that?
I think the biggest issue that I see when people come to me is that they are putting way too much on themselves, right? They're like, here's my list of 500 things, and I'm just going to keep working until I get it done. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, like, you, me, everyone else, especially I would say freelancers, people who are starting side hustles, they are by nature ambitious people, right? But we cannot do everything, and we definitely can't do everything right now. And so I think that the biggest issue is people are thinking like, I'm just doing it wrong. Some way, somehow I'm going to be able to Tetris everything together so that I can do everything that I want in this confined period of time. And that's just actually not possible. Like you and me and everyone else, all the listeners here, we could all probably work 18 hours a day for the rest of our lives, and there would still be a to-do list, right? There would still be stuff that we want to do because we're ambitious people. And so I think that really taking a step back and saying, okay, let's learn how to prioritize so that we can say, yeah, it's not like you're never going to do this thing, but we're going to put it over here for right now while we make real progress in this other area. And then after we've got that going, then we go and we look for our new goals or the new projects, et cetera. Because otherwise we spread ourselves out too thin and we burn out instead of having that stability and the sustainability that is really needed to have a successful business.
Got you. And that kind of flows into the next question, which is, I was going to actually ask you, do you have some kind of like priority system that you recommend people use when it comes to time management?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about task management, and then I'll talk about how prioritization comes into that. So I think, the secondary big issue is that we're storing all this stuff in our brains, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of having an external task system or a task app or just something that we're using to get it all out of our head, we're trying to remember everything, which is really stressful and it doesn't work very well. So I think the first step to prioritizing is actually to get all the stuff out of our brain. And if you're someone who is sitting there and you're like, I've got a notebook on my desk and I'm also using Asana and my email is full of to-dos and Slack is full of to-dos and we just have like all the systems everywhere, think about consolidating, using those things as funnels into a single place. If people want any recommendations on this, I have reviewed probably 50 different task apps, and my absolute favorite is called TickTick, Tick, not to be confused with TikTok. That is like very fun, but not for my productivity. But TickTick is really
the process of getting banned, but go ahead.
Right, exactly. Yeah, not that, but TickTick. Any other app you're using will probably work as well, but I like this one because it's free. So there's a low barrier for entry. It's super easy to use and it syncs across all of your devices. So it doesn't matter if, you've got a Mac computer and an Android phone and Google Alexa and, Amazon Alexa and Google Home and like all of these things. It's just going to sync everywhere. Makes it really easy to use to get stuff out of our brain. But then you asked the question about prioritization. And so I really think with prioritization, I think about it very differently than a lot of people. A lot of people hear prioritization and think high, medium, low, or P1, P2, P3, right? And I think about prioritization as when. When am I going to do the thing? When is the next step? So I think about it as due date, like DO date, instead of due date, DUE date. Like, what is the next action and when does it actually fit into the calendar? Because once you realize that, hey, you may want to work 8 hours today, but you have 3 hours worth of meetings, and also you need to have lunch and go to the bathroom and like do, other things. You might only have like 3 solid hours of work time left. And you really need to think about what is the most impactful thing that's going to go into that time so that we can prioritize by the time we have. I like to think of it as like, we want to plan for the time we actually have, not the time we wish we had.
Okay. Interesting. So like in your priority hierarchy, I'm just comparing it to, I'll even compare it to what I do. Because like when I started getting overwhelmed, I started noticing that stuff is not going to get done. Like you only have so much time in the day. And it really comes down to what's the priority. And some stuff's just not going to get done except that, but make sure the important stuff gets done. I did create like that hierarchy system you mentioned, but it wasn't based on time. It's based on like, hey, what's the most important, first priority, then second priority, what's in the middle, then third priority, what's at the low. And if something pops up in its first priority, it goes there. But if something pops up and it's not that important, it will automatically go to third priority. But each week when I review them, if whatever's not done, it goes up a priority level in terms of a tier. But hearing your approach is really interesting because your basis is time. So it kind of makes sure that everything gets done, but in a different way.
Yeah. And it's like it's not like we have no concept of like what's important and what's not. It's just that if something is important and it's urgent, it's happening sooner, right? And it's kind of going on the calendar and we're making time for that thing. And if something is like not that important, if it's in your third tier, that's something where it's like, it's a nice to have, right? If it gets done, great. And if it doesn't, then it will be moved. And sometimes you're like, oh, I've moved something 6 times. This is not important. I clearly don't believe this is an important thing. Maybe it needs to be outsourced. Maybe it needs to be delegated, or maybe we just drop it all together.
Oh, yeah. You just said a magic word that some people are either hesitant to do or they haven't even thought about it, but outsourcing. You think that's probably a big cause in some of the anxiety that some people feel if they start to get overwhelmed? Like some of these smaller tasks that they don't take that, they're not hard to do, but they are taking up space in your head because they still need to be done. But they don't necessarily have to be done by you.
Right.
I feel like that's something that bringing it back to self-employed and freelancers is something to consider, is at least coming up with a point to where it will be appropriate to start outsourcing.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've hit on something, and that is like, it doesn't have to be done by you. And I think that when we are thinking about all of the things that we need to get done, that's a really key distinction, whether it needs to get done and if that has to be done by you. And I know that like when we're early in a side hustle or an entrepreneurial journey, it might feel like, well, how could we possibly outsource things? We're not making any money yet, right? Like we need money to outsource things. And that is true. But there becomes a point typically for most people, and it's usually that point when they're starting to get overwhelmed, where they are bringing in money. And you want to think about, okay, what would be more effective here? Me spending an hour actually making money, or me paying somebody less than I'm earning to do something else so that I could go make more money, right? And so that's how I often think of this, is if there's something that can be processized, that somebody could do with a checklist, a process, et cetera, and I can give that to somebody and know that they're going to do it right, then I want to do that because I want to use my brain power to be working on the harder stuff.
Right. So I think the term that we're looking for is SOP, standard operating procedure. But you could just make that and have someone do it for you.
Yeah. And also there are really easy ways. I think when we say SOPs, right, like people are like, oh, that's so much documentation. That's so, they get a little scared off by it, right? But I think there are tools that can really help us with this now. So one, there's tools like tango.us, which will essentially like make your SOP for you by watching it. You just turn it on, you do whatever the thing is, and it automatically creates screenshots and a step-by-step process of what you're doing, right? There are, you can just record yourself on Loom doing whatever you're doing, and then ask the person who you're delegating it to make the process for you, right? So I think there are a lot of ways we get it in, I think we were like, oh, it's just going to take so long for me to train somebody to do this. It's easier to do it myself. I think that comes up a lot for folks that I work with. And that may be true if it's a one-off thing. But if it's something that you're doing week over week or month over month, then it is totally worth the investment to create that SOP or delegate it to, train somebody on it so that they can take it off of your plate forever.
Right. Kind of gives me flashbacks of I used to be a YouTube manager for the YouTube channel, The Rideshare Guy, covered a lot of gig content. And in the early days, each time we would establish some new system, Harry Campbell, he's the founder, he would always have me create an SOP for it in Google Docs. I saw what he was doing. He was basically systemizing this so that anyone could do it. And he's not the one who made it. I'm the one who made it. And I was the freelancer.
Yep,
So,
exactly. Yeah. Like that, I think people miss out on that. They're like, I have to spend all the time doing it. And like, no, like he could give it to you. You're going to do a first pass at it. He's going to look at it and be like, you missed this thing or, add this thing. But now you did the work and you have ownership of it at the same time, right? You fully understand it.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times, especially as freelancers and self-employed people, we get in the habit of just doing stuff ourselves. And in the starting phases, that is something you're probably going to need to do. But we want to give ourselves room to be able to grow out of that mentality, expand our horizons before we get overwhelmed and burned out.
Yep, totally.
Which it kind of ties into the next question I'm going to ask, but we're doing all this so we don't burn out. But let's say someone unfortunately comes across this information, they're already burned out. Or if someone is starting to feel the burnout happening, like what advice would you give them to avoid it from happening? Like, it's already in the process of happening. How can I stop it?
Yeah. So I think it's really hard, right? Burnout is hard. And I think one of the things that we can do is, let me take a step back. Burnout is not going to be solved by a weekend or a vacation, right? We have to actually structure.
That's such a misconception. Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's not going to be solved by a bubble bath. It's not going to be solved. Like that does not solve burnout, right? When we want to solve burnout, we have to structurally change the way that we are working. And I think that while this can be difficult when we're freelancers or working for ourselves, in some ways it's actually a little easier than when we work for other people, because when we're working for ourselves, we have control over these things, even when it feels like we don't. And so if someone is listening to this and they're already feeling really burnt out, the first thing that I would say is let's take stock of everything that you're doing and just like get it down in a Google Doc, on paper, however it is, so that we can actually see what we're working with. Then we want to say, okay, what are the things I need to keep in, right? There's like, I'm sure client work. Yes, we need to get paid, right? Like there's going to be things that are clear, like we have to keep doing this stuff. And there's going to be other stuff where you might say, oh, you know what? This does need to get done, but doesn't need to get done by me. I could outsource that. There might be other stuff on there. And I think this is true of so many entrepreneurs and people with side hustles. There's a lot of like aspirational stuff, right? It's stuff that is a good idea that you want to do, that you think you should do. And it's just hanging out there with all the other stuff that actually has to be done. And so I think it's really good to separate these two things. And so I have for my business, a bucket called Someday Maybe, right? And it's stuff that I have not, it's great ideas, right? They're all great ideas, I think, but I have not committed to actually moving forward on them yet. And this is really helpful because sometimes it's like, we get shiny object syndrome, right? Where it's like, oh, we should do that. We should do that. We're going to start that. And all of a sudden we're just doing way too many things. And so being able to separate that obligation from aspiration is really helpful. You can always pull things from there, right? But you don't want them to be like pressing down on you all of the time. And then back to the concept of boundaries. I think if you're in a full burnout mode, there are some things you need to think about, which is sleep, right? How can you prioritize sleep first and foremost? Because everything is going to be easier if you prioritize sleep. How can you reset some boundaries? And this might be just putting an out of office reply on your email after 6 p.m. or your Slack or whatever that just says, thank you so much. I will be back with you tomorrow. Or, something using our technology to help us with some boundaries. If we have clients who are used to being able to contact us any old time, we might need to actually have a conversation and say, hey, I'm restructuring some things in my business. I'm going to be available to you from, this time to this time, 5 days a week. And after that, I will get back to you on the weekends. And I always think that it's really helpful to structure these boundaries as not, I'm no longer going to be able to answer your emails at 9 p.m., but like, hey, I will be able to be available to you during these hours. So just like structuring it in a positive way. So those are some things that I would start with if you're already feeling burnout.
Okay. Yeah, some pretty applicable advice. Would you say the two areas of separating as far as like, hey, this has to get done versus the maybe and kind of the idea bucket? One of the criteria for something that goes in the second type of bucket is it's not integral to the outcome that you're looking to achieve that affects your finances. Because a lot of the idea stuff, it's speculation, but we know it has value and maybe we can find some way to implement it in our businesses. But we may not have the time to actually figure that stuff out. But if we don't write it down or prioritize it or something, we feel like we're missing out or we're not going to grow. So by being able to put it somewhere and like, hey, maybe in my free time, I'll have more time to, look into that further. I got bored one day and, maybe it could finally move over. But
yeah, I mean, I use it as a way. So I do a quarterly goal process for myself, right? Where I, every 3 months, I'm looking at what do the next 3 months look like? What are my goals for this quarter? What am I trying to do? And if there's not anything, I mean, this has never happened. I was going to say, if there's not anything top of mind, right, then I would go there. But actually what I do is I go to that idea bucket that someday maybe, and things are tagged in there like sales and marketing or like product ideas or whatever. And I will pick like one, maybe two of those things to bring over and really focus on over the next quarter. And this is, it's one of those things where I think my someday maybe has like 500 things in it, right? Because I produce ideas at a rate that is far greater than my ability to execute on them. And also sometimes coming back to that shiny object syndrome, sometimes, I just went to a conference and I have like a notebook full of great ideas, right? And they were all shiny when I was at the conference, but I'm actually going to wait like a week to put them into my task system because some of them might have lost their luster a week out, right? They might not be as shiny anymore. And so I'm going to pop them all in there. And one of them, I have one idea already that I'm like, oh, I need to implement this because it's an idea that's going to help people be able to pay me easier and faster. I'm like, this one makes sense. I'm going to implement that. But everything else is going on the back burner. And I may do it at some point in the future, and I may never do it. But to your point, I don't feel like I'm going to lose out on it. I don't have my brain space being taken up, like remembering all of this stuff.
Right. Okay. So it's a natural defense against the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Okay. I can see that. So, I hate the fact that I didn't get to watch it because I saw it right before we got on here. When I was on your YouTube channel, I came across a video that said how not to rely on your memory. I didn't have time to watch it. So I am going to leave that video in the show notes, but I wanted to ask you, have you already described like everything you mentioned? I could see how that should take the place of just remembering something. But would you say that you've already kind of elaborated on that?
Yeah. I think there's a lot more in that specific video. We're talking about not only task systems and kind of, I think that's one of the ways not to rely on memory is just to get it out of your brain. We want to think about having, like, if you think about your task system as an external brain, that's how I like to think about it, right? It's like an external hard drive that I have access to all of the time that frees up this brain space to actually do the work I'm trying to do instead of to constantly be remembering things, right? Because if we're not doing that, I think we all know what happens, right? We've had that experience of where we're working on something and then our brain goes like, oh, I forgot to send that email. And then we like open up another tab and we send something. And then our brain goes, oh, I needed to buy shoes for my kid. Oh, and we open up another tab. And then at the end of the day, we're like, oh, like that, I didn't do the thing on the first tab, right? So I think one, having a task system helps with that. But that video in specific is also talking about this concept that I call opportunistic lists. And this is all this stuff that also either lives in our head or just, doesn't get captured at all, that isn't necessarily a task, but is opportunistic in nature. So here's what I mean. The most simple version of this is a grocery list, right? If you have a place where every time you notice, oh, peanut butter is running out, you put it in there. Then when you're at, or like, I don't know, whatever you need, if you notice things, you just add it to the grocery list. Then when you are at the store, the grocery list is already made. Or if you're driving by a store and you're like, oh, I know we're out of milk because it's on this list, you can grab it, right? So that's one version of that. But also think about like books to read, right? I don't know about you, but I get recommendations for books a lot, and I see things a lot. I really like to read. I think my books to read list is like 500 items long also, because I'm always like, oh, that would be great. That would be great. But what really sucks, right? If you're like finish a book and you're like, oh, I would love to read something now. And you're like, what was that book that my sister-in-law told me about? Right. And then, or stuff to watch, right? It's like, how much time do we spend scrolling on Netflix looking for something to watch, when instead, if we have a list of stuff that we already was recommended to us or we already thought about, then we don't waste any of that time. We just go to the list and we're like, great, I'm going to pick this thing. So that's what I mean by not relying on memory with all of that stuff.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting though. I don't think I've approached like watching something like that, but I'm watching stuff in that way. But that is how I approach reading. I enjoy reading too. I mean, it would make what's behind me kind of invalid if I didn't. I'd be kind of a hypocrite. But yeah, when you do stuff like that, it frees up your memory for other things.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say if something else can't take that free space, well, that just means you have less things on your mind. No one's going to complain about that.
Right, exactly. And I think it's like we spend it's like we have this big chunk of our brain, if we're not externalizing this stuff, that is just being used up to remember the things. And it feels really stressful because I think for a lot of folks, it feels like, I know I'm missing something. I just don't know what it is or when it's going to come back to kick me, right?
That's the worst feeling.
It feels terrible because you're like, I know. And then it's like you wake up at 4 a.m. and you're like, oh, this was the thing, right? And if we can externalize that, we can use a task system. If I mentioned TickTick, but anything will work. But I keep like all these opportunistic lists in the same system where I keep all my tasks, because then I only have one place to go. Like I'm not looking, where did I keep that? Where did I keep this? It's just all in one place.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, very functional. Well, I gotta say that we're actually gonna start winding down this episode in a minute. But I always ask my guests if they have any questions they want to ask me. But my audience has made me say that guests can't ask about why'd you start the Side Hustle Society anymore. We've heard that 5 times. No. But minus that question, do you have any questions you want to ask me, Alexis?
Yeah. So you seem like a person who's had you have a lot of things going on. You've had a lot of side hustles. I would like to know which has been your favorite so far. And maybe if I can ask 2 questions, what was the thing you did that got you the fastest from idea to revenue?
Probably YouTube. I know that's a relatively fast answer, but I'm not saying YouTube's perfect. In fact, I got a video series I'm coming out that shares the pros and cons of being a YouTuber. But I would say YouTube, because YouTube has the ability to be the central theme that can be monetized while I do other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I was I still am, but a freelance video editor, I can make YouTube videos about that and help people, and it can be monetized. When I started getting units to put on Airbnb, well, now I can make videos covering being an Airbnb host. When I wrote my first book, The Anatomy of Financial Success, okay, now I can make videos about being an author. So anything I've got going, YouTube can fit in it in a very, very, very organic and natural way. And as far as revenue, it took my channel, my first channel, 9 months to get monetized, at least on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the first way I made money. I made money with affiliate marketing. So I made a free course on how to make the most money using Uber Eats, various tactics and strategies. And, back then the drivers signed up with my link. They would get a bonus and I would get a bonus. And these bonuses range from like $20 to $500.
Yeah.
So I saw immediately, oh, wait, this YouTube thing has a lot of potential to make a lot of money, but it's also a natural way to just cover everything that I'm doing. Even in the future, there's stuff that I haven't done yet that I'm probably going to do that I can put into YouTube and vice versa.
Right. It's like a unifying force in some ways between all the things that you do that let you both help people and monetize.
Right. And nowadays, that formula is expanding because all these other platforms are trying to grab some of that share, and they're like trying to offer creators like monetization, like Facebook and X, even though I still call it Twitter, and
Me
Rumble,
too.
like, yeah, all these alternative platforms. Now, I haven't gone as far as to put my content on those platforms yet, but it's coming in the very near future. So instead of YouTube, it's probably going to be just content creation in general. So yeah, it's been quite the journey. I'm glad that YouTube was kind of the first thing I started because it serves as a foundation, and then I'll just say content creation. So it's not exclusive to YouTube, because when I put stuff on Facebook and X and Rumble and these places, it's just going to be so much opportunity.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah. But I guess with that being said, if people want more of you, Alexis, where do they need to go to? And what's your YouTube channel? Feel free to shout it out.
Yeah, YouTube channel is Do More, Stress Less. And that is where I am at most of the socials. And then also, if folks want, distraction is something we didn't talk about today when it comes to time management and productivity, but that's a big one too. And so if folks are interested in reducing the number of distractions that they have so that they can claw back more of their time, studies show that actually every time we get distracted, it takes us on average 23 minutes to refocus on what we were doing. Then you can go to my website, which is alexishaselberger.com, and you can download a free distraction action plan.
Cool. We'll be sure to leave links in the description to those. And Alexis, I want to thank you for coming on the Side Hustle Society. If y'all are watching on YouTube, you can give us a thumbs up for YouTube algorithm. Greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. And if you're listening to us, if you could leave a review on your thoughts on the episode, that'd be awesome. We'd love to hear what you have to say. With that being said, we'll catch y'all later. Be sure to be safe and be profitable, everyone. See you.
This episode may be over, but your hustling journey has just started. Visit thesidehustlesociety.com to access all links and resources mentioned in the show that will help you on your hustler's journey.